The telegram arrived in Carlin, Nevada, on a Tuesday morning in July of 1882, and Victoria Shepherd could read every single word of it, though she kept that knowledge locked behind her teeth like a secret worth more than silver. Victoria stood in the telegraph office, her calico dress dusty from the journey into town, watching as Mr. Henderson squinted at the paper through his spectacles. The older man had received the message for the Silver Creek Ranch where she worked as a cook, and he struggled to make out the words in the dim light. She could have read it aloud in seconds, could have told him it was about a shipment of cattle arriving 3 days early, but instead she waited patiently, her hands folded, her expression blank. Women like her, half-Mexican daughters of deceased ranchers who now worked for wages, were not supposed to possess such skills. Her father had taught her in secret before he died when she was 16, making her promise to hide her abilities unless absolutely necessary. That had been 6 years ago, and she had kept that promise faithfully. "Cattle coming early," Mr. Henderson finally announced, handing her the telegram. "You take this to Mr. Patterson at the ranch." Victoria accepted the paper, her fingers careful not to betray how easily her eyes had already absorbed its contents. She tucked it into her apron pocket and stepped back into the blazing Nevada sun, where the heat shimmered off the dirt streets and made the distant mountains waver like mirages. Carlin was a small town, built around the railroad and the ranches that supplied cattle to the trains heading east. It was a place where everyone knew everyone else's business, or thought they did. She had walked halfway to where she had tied her horse when she heard the commotion outside the saloon. A young cowboy stood in the street, his face flushed with embarrassment as 2 older ranch hands laughed at him. One of them held up a piece of paper, waving it mockingly. "Cannot even read his own brother's letter," the man jeered. "What kind of fool cannot read?" The young cowboy's jaw tightened, his hands balling into fists at his sides. Victoria recognized him as one of the new hires at the Silver Creek Ranch, though she had never spoken to him directly. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that fell across his forehead. She thought his name was William something, one of the drifters who came through looking for work during the busy season. "Give it back, Morrison," the cowboy said, his voice low and dangerous. "Why?" "So you can stare at it some more and pretend you know what it says," Morrison laughed, and his companion joined in. "Your brother probably thinks you are smart enough to read. What a disappointment you must be." Victoria should have kept walking. It was not her business, and drawing attention to herself was the last thing she wanted. But something about the young cowboy's expression, the mixture of shame and fury and helplessness, made her stop. She knew that feeling. She had watched her mother wear it for years before she died, unable to read the bills that came or the letters from relatives, dependent on the kindness or cruelty of others to tell her what they said. "Excuse me," Victoria said, approaching the group. "I believe that letter belongs to the gentleman, not to you." Morrison turned, his eyes sweeping over her with dismissive amusement. "This does not concern you, girl. Go back to your cooking pots." "The letter concerns him, and you are stealing his property," Victoria said calmly. "That makes it everyone's concern." The young cowboy looked at her, surprise flickering across his face. Morrison took a step toward her, still holding the letter high. "And what are you going to do about it?" "I am going to ask you one more time to return what is not yours," Victoria said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "After that, I will go to Sheriff Collins and explain that you are a thief." Morrison's face darkened, but his companion grabbed his arm. "Come on, it is not worth the trouble. Let the idiot have his paper." With a snort of disgust, Morrison threw the letter on the ground at the cowboy's feet and stalked back into the saloon. His friend followed, leaving Victoria and the cowboy standing in the street. The cowboy bent down and picked up the letter, brushing dust from it carefully, his movements almost reverent. "Thank you," he said, looking at her properly for the first time. His eyes were a surprising shade of blue-gray, like the sky before a storm. "You did not have to do that." "No one should be mocked for what they cannot help," Victoria said. "What is your name?" "William Orson. Most people call me Will." He hesitated, glancing down at the letter in his hands. "I have been carrying this for 3 days, and I have no idea what my brother wrote. The only person I trust enough to ask is the foreman, but he is out on the range until next week." Victoria made a decision that would change everything, though she did not know it yet. "I could read it for you." Will stared at her. "You can read?" "Yes, but you are a woman. And you work as a cook." He said it without malice, only confusion, stating facts as he understood them. "Being a woman does not make a person stupid," Victoria said, allowing a slight edge into her voice. "And working as a cook does not mean I am illiterate. My father believed education was important, regardless of whether I was his son or daughter." Will looked around nervously, as if worried someone might overhear. "If people knew you could read, they would think it was strange. They might cause you trouble." "Then perhaps we should not discuss it in the middle of the street," Victoria said dryly. "There is a bench behind the general store where no one will see us, unless you would prefer to wait a week to learn what your brother has written." Will followed her without another word, his long stride easily keeping pace with hers. Behind the general store, in the shade of the building, they sat on the weathered bench where delivery men usually rested between unloading wagons. Victoria held out her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Will gave her the letter. The paper was worn from being carried and refolded multiple times, and the handwriting was unpracticed but legible. Victoria read silently first, then looked up at Will's anxious face. "Your brother's name is Thomas?" she asked. "Yes, is he well?" "Is something wrong?" "He is well," Victoria assured him. "He writes that he has settled in California near Sacramento. He has found work on a farm and is saving money. He asks if you have decided whether you will join him there, as he mentioned in his previous letter." Will's expression shifted from worry to something more complex, a mixture of relief and longing and uncertainty. "There was no previous letter. It must have gotten lost. I have been waiting months to hear from him." Victoria continued reading aloud, translating Thomas's words into spoken language. "Thomas wrote about the weather in California, about the opportunities he saw there, about how much he missed his brother and hoped they could build a life together in a place where the land was fertile, and the future seemed less harsh than the Nevada desert. He asked Will to write back, to let him know his thoughts, and signed it with obvious affection. He wants you to write to him," Victoria said, folding the letter carefully and handing it back. "I cannot write any more than I can read," Will said quietly, taking the letter and holding it as if it were made of gold. "I could pay someone to write a reply, but I would not know what they wrote. They could put anything, and I would be none the wiser." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of that powerlessness hanging between them. Victoria understood it in a way most people could not. To be unable to read or write in a world full of words was to be forever at the mercy of others, forever vulnerable to deception or exploitation. "I could teach you," she heard herself say. Will turned to her, his eyes wide. "Teach me to read and write. It would take time and you would need to practice, but it can be done. My father taught me when I was a child, starting with simple words and building from there." "Why would you do that for a stranger?" Will asked, his voice full of wonder and suspicion in equal measure. Victoria considered the question. Why would she risk exposing her secret, risk the gossip and the judgment that would come if people found out? But looking at Will's face, at the desperate hope barely concealed there, she knew the answer. "Because I know what it is like to have knowledge that you must hide," she said. "And I know what it is like to wish someone would help you when you need it most. Besides, you are not exactly a stranger. We work at the same ranch. I did not even know your name until you introduced yourself just now," Will admitted. "Victoria Shepherd. People call me Victoria or Miss Shepherd when they remember their manners." A smile tugged at the corner of Will's mouth, the first she had seen from him. "Miss Shepherd, will you really teach me to read and write? If you are willing to learn, I am willing to teach," Victoria said. "But it must be kept secret. No one can know, not the other ranch hands, not Mr. Patterson, no one. If word got out that I could read and write, there would be questions I cannot afford to answer, and if people knew you were meeting with me alone, they would assume the worst." "I understand," Will said seriously. "When do we start?" "Tomorrow evening after supper. There is an old line shack about a mile north of the ranch near the creek. Do you know it? I have seen it on patrol. It is abandoned. Meet me there an hour before sunset. Bring paper if you have any and a pencil or pen." Will nodded, his expression determined. "I will be there. And Miss Shepherd, thank you. This means more to me than I can say." Victoria stood, brushing dust from her skirt. "Thank you is premature. Wait until you have struggled through your first lesson before you decide whether to be grateful." But she smiled as she said it, and Will smiled back, and something warm and fragile flickered to life in the space between them, though neither recognized it yet for what it was. The next evening, Victoria packed a small bag with her father's old primer, the one he had used to teach her years ago, along with sheets of paper she had carefully saved from old supply orders and 2 pencils she had sharpened to fine points. She told the other ranch hands she was going for a walk to escape the heat of the bunkhouse kitchen, which was true enough, and no one questioned her. Women who worked on ranches were afforded a certain amount of freedom that town women were not, if only because there were fewer people to monitor their movements. The line shack was exactly as she remembered it, a small rough structure built years ago to shelter cowboys during long cattle drives. It had not been used in several seasons, and the door hung crooked on its hinges, but the roof was intact, and there was a table and 2 chairs inside, along with an old stove that no longer worked. Evening light slanted through the gaps in the wooden walls, painting golden stripes across the dusty floor. Will was already there, waiting outside, his hat in his hands. He had washed and changed into a clean shirt, and Victoria felt an unexpected flutter in her chest at the realization that he had made an effort for this meeting for her. "I was not sure you would come," he admitted. "I said I would be here. I keep my promises." Victoria pushed open the door and stepped inside, wrinkling her nose at the musty smell. "It is not much, but it is private." They settled at the table, and Victoria spread out her materials. She opened the primer to the first page, where simple words were printed alongside small illustrations. Apple, ball, cat, dog. Reading is about recognizing patterns, she began, slipping into the same gentle teaching voice her father had used. Each letter makes a sound, and when you put the sounds together, they form words. We will start with the alphabet. Will leaned forward, his attention absolute. Victoria pointed to the first letter and pronounced it, then had him repeat it. They worked through the entire alphabet 3 times before she moved on to simple words. Will was a quick study, his mind sharp despite his lack of formal education, and he practiced each sound with an intensity that made her smile. "You are doing well," she encouraged him after an hour. "Better than I expected for a first lesson." "I have wanted this for so long," Will said, staring at the page as if trying to memorize every mark. "My parents died when Thomas and I were young, and we grew up working on whatever ranch would take us. There was never time for school, never anyone who cared whether we learned anything beyond how to rope a steer and mend a fence. Education should not be only for the wealthy, Victoria said, feeling the familiar anger rise in her chest. My father used to say that reading and writing were tools for freedom, that they gave a person choices. He was right. When my mother died and left me alone, I could read the deed to our land. I could read the contract when I sold it. No one could cheat me because I knew exactly what the words said. What happened to your land? Will asked. I sold it to pay debts after my father died. There was too much owed and I could not work it alone. I was 16 and alone, and I made the best choice I could at the time. Some days I regret it, but most days I am simply grateful I understood enough to get a fair price. They fell into a comfortable rhythm over the following weeks, meeting every evening at the line shack for an hour or two of lessons. Victoria taught Will to recognize letters and form words, to sound out new terms and understand basic grammar. She was patient with his mistakes and generous with her praise, and Will absorbed everything like parched earth drinking in rain. But their lessons were more than just education. In the privacy of the line shack, they talked about their lives, their dreams, the things they had seen and the places they hoped to go. Will told her about growing up with Thomas, about the fierce bond between them and the loneliness he felt now that his brother was gone. Victoria spoke of her father's gentle wisdom and her mother's quiet strength, of the weight of being different in a world that demanded conformity. You ever wish you could just be like everyone else? Will asked one evening as they practiced writing simple sentences. His handwriting was improving, the letters less shaky than they had been at the start. Every day, Victoria admitted. It would be easier to pretend I am simple and uneducated, to let people think what they want. But then, I remember my father saying that hiding your light does not make the world brighter, it only makes your own life darker. So I hide what I must to survive, but I refuse to be ashamed of what I know. Will looked at her with an expression she could not quite name, something tender and admiring and intense. You are the bravest person I have ever met. I am not brave. I am simply tired of being afraid. That is what bravery is, Miss Shepherd, doing what must be done even when you are afraid. Victoria's heart beat faster, and she looked away, focusing on the paper in front of them. She had begun to notice things about Will over the past weeks, things that had nothing to do with teaching or learning. The way his hands moved with unexpected grace despite their calluses and scars. The sound of his laugh when she made a joke about his terrible spelling. The careful way he listened to her, as if every word she spoke mattered. It was dangerous, she knew, to feel this way about him. She had sworn after her father died that she would never depend on anyone, never give another person power over her life and choices. And yet here she was, looking forward to their evening meetings with an anticipation that felt like hunger, thinking about Will during the day when she should be focused on her work. One evening in late August, after they had been meeting for nearly 6 weeks, Will read an entire page from the primer without help. His voice was halting but clear, and when he finished, he looked up at Victoria with such joy that she felt her breath catch. I did it, he said, disbelief and pride mingling in his voice. I actually read a whole page. You did, Victoria confirmed, her own smile so wide it hurt. Will, you have learned so much. In a few more weeks you will be ready to write that letter to Thomas. Will set down the primer carefully, his expression turning serious. I could not have done this without you. Victoria, I need you to know how much this means to me. You have given me something I thought I would never have. The way he said her name, without the formal miss, sent warmth flooding through her. They had grown more comfortable with each other over the weeks, the boundaries between teacher and student, between near strangers and something more, gradually dissolving. "It has been my privilege," Victoria said softly. "You are an excellent student, and it has been a joy to watch you learn." Will reached across the table and took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "It is more than that, and you know it. These past weeks, coming here to meet you, learning from you, talking with you, it has been the best part of my days. The only part that matters." Victoria knew she should pull her hand away, should remind him of propriety and caution, should protect herself from the vulnerability of caring. But she did not want to. She was tired of being careful, tired of hiding, tired of being alone. "It has been the best part of my days, too," she whispered. Will stood and came around the table, and Victoria rose to meet him. They stood close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could smell the clean scent of soap and leather and summer grass. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin with a tenderness that made her eyes sting. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough. "Yes," Victoria breathed, and then his lips were on hers, soft and careful and full of restrained longing. The kiss was brief, almost chaste, but it changed everything. When they pulled apart, Victoria saw her own wonder reflected in Will's eyes, along with something deeper, something that looked like the beginning of love. "I have been wanting to do that for weeks," Will admitted, his forehead resting against hers. "Every time you smile at me, every time you laugh at something I say, every time you patiently correct my spelling, I think about kissing you. I am supposed to be teaching you to read, not kissing you in abandoned line shacks," Victoria said, but she was smiling, her hands resting on his chest where she could feel the rapid beating of his heart. "Can you not do both?" Will asked, grinning. "I suppose I could make an exception," Victoria said, and kissed him again, less carefully this time, letting herself feel the full force of the attraction that had been building between them. They continued their lessons after that, but the dynamic had shifted. Now, their meetings included stolen kisses and held hands, whispered confessions and plans for a future that was beginning to seem possible. Will progressed rapidly in his reading and writing, motivated now not just by the desire to communicate with his brother, but by the dream of building a life with Victoria, a life where they could be partners in every sense. In early September, Will wrote his first letter to Thomas. Victoria sat beside him, offering guidance on spelling and grammar but letting him form the words himself. His handwriting was still rough, the letters uneven, but every word was his own. "Dear Thomas," he wrote, speaking the words aloud as he formed them. "I received your letter from July, and I am sorry it took so long to write back. I have been learning to read and write with the help of a remarkable woman named Victoria Shepherd. She is smart and kind and patient, and I am falling in love with her. I would like to come to California, but only if Victoria will come with me as my wife. I have not asked her yet, but I am hoping she will say yes. Your brother, William." Victoria stared at the letter, her heart pounding so hard she thought Will must surely hear it. "You want to marry me." Will set down his pencil and turned to face her fully. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a short time. But Victoria, I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. You have given me so much, not just the ability to read and write, but hope. A reason to imagine a future that is better than just drifting from ranch to ranch, alone and ignorant. I love you, and I want to spend my life with you if you will have me." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. "Yes," she said, her voice shaking. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you too, Will. I did not plan to, I tried not to, but I do." Will pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, and Victoria pressed her face against his chest, feeling the solid reality of him, the possibility of a future she had not dared to imagine. "We should tell people," Will said after a long moment. I do not want to hide anymore. I want everyone to know you are going to be my wife. They will ask questions, Victoria warned, about how we met, about when we started courting. Then we will tell them the truth. That you taught me to read and write, that I fell in love with my teacher, and that we are going to California to start fresh. Victoria pulled back to look at him, searching his face. You are not ashamed that I can read and write. You do not worry what people will think. I am proud that you can read and write. I am proud that you are brilliant and brave and that somehow, miraculously, you chose me. Will kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. Anyone who has a problem with it can go to hell. They told Mr. Patterson the next day, standing together in his office at the ranch house. The foreman listened to their story with raised eyebrows, his weathered face skeptical. You are saying this girl taught you to read? Patterson asked, looking at Victoria with new eyes. She did. And she is not a girl, she is a woman, and she is going to be my wife. Will's voice was firm, brooking no argument. Patterson leaned back in his chair, studying them both. I will be honest. I do not know what to make of this. Women who can read and write are not common, especially not women who work as cooks on cattle ranches. But I have watched you these past months, Orson, and you have been a good worker. If Miss Shepherd here is responsible for the change I have seen in you, then I suppose I should thank her. The change is that he can now read his mail and write his own letters, Victoria said, lifting her chin. I consider that an improvement for any man. A smile cracked Patterson's stern expression. I suppose it is. When are you planning to wed? As soon as possible, Will said. We want to head to California before winter, join my brother there. I will be sorry to lose you both, but I understand. Young people should have their chance at something better. Patterson stood and extended his hand to Will, then to Victoria. Congratulations, I hope you will be very happy. The wedding took place 3 weeks later in the small church in Carlin, with the minister who traveled through once a month to perform such services. Victoria wore a simple dress she had sewn herself from cream-colored fabric, and Will wore his best clothes, his hair slicked back, and his boots polished. There were not many guests, just a few people from the ranch, and the town who had come to witness the unusual union of the educated cook and the cowboy she had taught to read. As Victoria stood before the minister and spoke her vows, she thought about the twisted path that had led her to this moment. If Morrison had not mocked Will in the street, if she had not intervened, if she had not offered to teach him, none of this would be happening. Fate, she decided, worked in strange and unexpected ways. I now pronounce you man and wife, the minister declared. You may kiss your bride. Will kissed her with enthusiasm that made the small congregation laugh and cheer, and Victoria kissed him back, not caring who saw or what they thought. She was married now, to a man who loved her not despite her intelligence but because of it, who saw her abilities as a gift rather than an aberration. They spent their wedding night in the small room Victoria had rented in Carlin, a space barely large enough for a bed and a dresser but private and theirs. Will was gentle and patient, treating her like something precious, and Victoria gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, talking about their plans and dreams until exhaustion finally claimed them. They left for California a week later, their possessions packed in saddlebags and a small wagon Will had bought with his saved wages. The journey would take several weeks, crossing the Sierra Nevada mountains before winter made the passes impassable. It was a risk, but Will had written to Thomas explaining their plans, and they both felt the pull of that promise of a new life. The first few days of travel were hot and dusty, following the emigrant trails west through Nevada's harsh terrain. They camped at night under the stars, and Victoria taught Will more advanced reading from the few books she had brought, while he taught her the skills of trail life, how to make a proper fire and cook over open flames and watch for signs of danger. "You know," Will said one evening as they sat by their fire, "I used to think being illiterate was the worst thing about me, the thing that made me less than other men. But now I realize it was just something I had not learned yet. You showed me that." "You were never less than anyone," Victoria said firmly. "You were simply denied an opportunity you should have had. That says nothing about your worth." "I know that now. You taught me that too." They crossed into California in late October, the air turning crisp with the promise of autumn. The land changed as they traveled, becoming greener and more fertile, and Victoria understood why Thomas had been drawn to this place. There was a sense of possibility here, of space and opportunity that felt different from the harsh emptiness of the Nevada desert. Thomas was waiting for them at the farm where he worked, just outside Sacramento. The reunion between the brothers was emotional, full of backslapping and laughter, and a few tears neither man would admit to. Thomas was older than Will by 3 years, with the same dark hair but lighter eyes, and he greeted Victoria with genuine warmth. "So you are the miracle worker my brother wrote about," Thomas said, shaking her hand. "I did not believe him when he said he had learned to read and write. I thought someone must have written that letter for him." "I wrote it myself," Will said proudly. "Every word. Victoria taught me." "Then I owe you a debt I can never repay," Thomas said seriously, looking at Victoria. "My brother and I have been separated by more than distance. We have been separated by words we could not share. You gave us that back." "Will did the work," Victoria said, embarrassed by the praise. "I simply showed him how." They stayed with Thomas while they looked for land of their own. The owner of the farm where Thomas worked was willing to sell them a small parcel on the edge of his property, 20 acres with a creek running through it and good soil for crops. It was more than Victoria had dared to hope for, a place that would be truly theirs. Will and Victoria worked side by side to build their life, clearing land and planting crops, constructing a small house that grew room by room as they could afford it. Victoria established a garden and learned to raise chickens, while Will worked with Thomas to bring in money during the planting and harvest seasons. In the evenings, they would sit together and read, Will's skills improving daily until he could tackle books that would have been impossible months before. Word spread in the small farming community about the woman who could read and write, the woman who had taught her husband that skill. Instead of judgment, Victoria found curiosity and respect. Other farmers began coming to her with letters they needed read or written, documents they needed help understanding. She started teaching, first just a few neighbors who wanted to learn, then a small group of children whose parents could not read to them. "You have started a school," Will said one day, watching as Victoria instructed 3 young girls in their letters. "Not a school, just lessons," Victoria protested, but she was smiling. "It is a school, and you are a teacher, a real one." By the following spring, Victoria was teaching regularly in a corner of the local church, with nearly a dozen students ranging from children to adults. She charged a small fee for those who could afford it and taught free of charge those who could not. Will supported her completely, proud of the work she was doing, proud of the respect she was earning. "Remember when you said your father told you that education was a tool for freedom?" Will asked her one evening as they prepared for bed. "I remember. You are giving people that tool. You are giving them freedom. Your father would be so proud of you." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes, the good kind again. "I hope so. I think about him often, about how much he gave up to teach me. I wish he could see what came of it." "I think he knows," Will said, pulling her close. "Wherever he is, I think he knows." In the summer of 1884, Victoria discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a mixture of joy and terror, remembering how her own mother had struggled and ultimately died from the hardships of frontier life. But she was not her mother, she reminded herself. She had knowledge and education and a loving husband and access to a doctor in Sacramento. She would be all right. Will was ecstatic, already planning how to expand their house to accommodate a child, talking about teaching his son or daughter to read even before they could walk. Victoria laughed at his enthusiasm, but she was touched by it too, by his assumption that any child of theirs would be educated and loved and given every opportunity. Their son was born in February of 1885, a healthy baby with a powerful set of lungs and Will's blue-gray eyes. They named him David, after Victoria's father, and he became the center of their world. Victoria cut back on her teaching to care for him, but she did not stop entirely. She could not. Teaching was as much a part of her now as breathing. When David was 3 months old, Victoria received a letter that made her cry. It was from a woman in Carlin, Nevada, addressed to Mrs. Victoria Orson, care of General Delivery in Sacramento. The woman wrote that she had heard the story of how Victoria had taught her husband to read, and that story had inspired her to seek lessons herself. She was now learning to read and write from the new schoolteacher in Carlin, and she wanted Victoria to know that her courage had changed another woman's life. "People are talking about you," Will said, reading the letter over her shoulder while David slept in Victoria's arms. "About what you did." "I just taught you to read, that is all." "No, you did more than that. You refused to hide your light. You showed other people that things could be different. That is worth more than you know." As the years passed, their life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Their farm prospered, aided by Will's hard work and Victoria's careful management of their accounts and records. David grew into a bright, curious child who could read simple words by the age of 4, taught by both his parents. Victoria continued her teaching, and the small school grew until the community built an actual schoolhouse and hired her as the official teacher, the first woman in the district to hold such a position. In 1887, Victoria gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's determination, and she completed their family in a way that felt perfect. Will doted on both children, reading them stories every night, teaching them their letters and numbers, making sure they understood how lucky they were to have such opportunities. On a warm evening in the summer of 1889, Victoria and Will sat on the porch of their now substantial home, watching David and Rose play in the yard while the sun set over the California hills. It had been 7 years since that day in Carlin when she had intervened in a street confrontation, 7 years since she had offered to teach a cowboy to raid. You ever think about how different things would be if Morrison had just given you back your letter? Victoria asked, leaning against Will's shoulder. "All the time," Will admitted. "I think about how I might have gone my whole life unable to read, might have lost touch with Thomas completely, might never have met you or had this life. It terrifies me, how close I came to missing all of this. I think about it too, about how I almost walked past you that day, how I almost decided it was not my business." Will turned to kiss the top of her head. "But you did not walk past. You stopped and you helped, even though it put you at risk. That is who you are, Victoria. You see someone who needs help and you refuse to look away. You make me sound much braver than I am. You are exactly as brave as I say you are. Braver, probably." Victoria smiled, watching her children chase each other in the fading light. "I never imagined I could have this. After my father died, I thought I would always be alone, always hiding, always afraid. You changed that. You taught me that I could be myself and still be loved." "You taught me to read," Will countered. I think that makes us even. No, Victoria said softly. You taught me that I deserved more than fear and hiding. You taught me that being smart was not something to apologize for. You said, teach me everything you know. I am listening. And you meant it. That changed my life as much as learning to read changed yours. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge. The same stars that had watched over them on their journey west. The same stars that would watch over their children and grandchildren in the years to come. Victoria thought about all the people she had taught over the years, all the lives that had been changed by the simple act of learning to read and write. She thought about that woman in Carlin who had been inspired to seek her own education, about the students in her schoolhouse who would grow up with opportunities their parents never had. But mostly she thought about Will, about the cowboy who had been brave enough to admit he could not read, brave enough to accept help from an unlikely source, brave enough to love her for exactly who she was. He had kept his promise that day in the street when Morrison had mocked him. He had listened, truly listened, and that had made all the difference. I love you, she said, the words as true now as they had been the day she first spoke them. I love you too, Will replied, his arm tightening around her. My brilliant, beautiful, brave teacher. And I love you, my student who became so much more. Inside the house, Victoria's books lined the shelves Will had built for her, and on Will's desk lay the letter he was writing to Thomas, the handwriting now confident and clear. In the bedroom, their children's primers waited for tomorrow's lessons, and in the schoolhouse down the road, more books waited for more students, an ever-growing circle of knowledge and opportunity. Victoria Shepard Orson had started with a simple act of kindness on a dusty Nevada street, defending a stranger from mockery, offering to share knowledge that she had been taught to hide. From that single decision had grown a life beyond anything she had imagined, a love that sustained her, a family that delighted her, and a purpose that fulfilled her. Nobody had believed she could read and write, or if they had believed it, they thought it was something strange, something wrong, something to be hidden away. But Will had looked at her abilities and said, teach me, had looked at her knowledge and seen not a threat but a gift, had looked at her and seen not someone strange but someone extraordinary. And in teaching him, she had learned something just as valuable. She had learned that the right person would not ask you to diminish yourself, would not require you to hide your light or apologize for your strengths. The right person would say, teach me, show me, share with me what you know. The right person would listen. Will had listened, and in listening, he had loved her, and in loving her, he had given her the freedom to be fully herself. It was a gift more precious than gold, more valuable than land or wealth or status. It was the gift of being seen and loved for who she truly was. As the last light faded from the sky, and the children came running inside for supper, Victoria felt a profound sense of gratitude for every choice that had led her to this moment. The hard choices and the easy ones, the fears she had conquered and the risks she had taken, all of it had been worth it to arrive here in this life with this man, raising these children, teaching these students, living this beautiful, unexpected life. Come on, Will said, standing and offering her his hand. Let us get these children fed and into bed, and then maybe you can help me with that letter to Thomas. I want to tell him about David's progress with his reading. Victoria took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. This man who had once been illiterate and ashamed, and now wrote letters to his brother about his son's education. She thought about that first lesson in the abandoned line shack, about how nervous they had both been, about how impossible this future had seemed. But here they were, living proof that education could change lives, that love could flourish in unexpected places, that courage and kindness could create ripples that spread far beyond what anyone could predict. Here they were, a teacher and her student, a woman who had refused to hide and a man who had been brave enough to learn, building a life and a legacy that would outlast them both. Victoria smiled as she followed Will inside, where their children waited and supper was growing cold and a whole evening of family and love and simple happiness stretched out before them. It was everything she had never dared to dream, and it was enough. More than enough. It was perfect.